Thank you. Yeah, so we've just had some amazing cutting-edge research advances from Rotman, and now we're going to talk about some real applications and potentially like one of the areas that could see perhaps the most impact from AI and have a huge impact on society. So Meta is interested in applying AI to scientific research. And so I'm really curious, if AI can only just about navigate a 3D maze, how is it possible it could do something as amazing as help with scientific research?
Thank you for inviting me, by the way. This is an absolute pleasure to be here. For me, this is one of the most exciting applications of AI and the progress that we're making. But maybe I start off with a question. How many of you have read one of these in the last little while, a peer-reviewed scientific paper? This is my kind of crowd. Okay, so 4,000 of these are going to get published today, mostly in biomedicine. And scientists are basically facing that challenge every single day. If you take the 4,000 that were published today and you go back in history, the last 200 years, there's 40 million scientific papers that basically represent most of everything that we know. So basically every single thing we know about the universe, about the mechanisms of life, about all the foundations for modern medicine, all the foundations for the technology that we use every single day. So those 40 million papers are extremely important, and most of that knowledge is locked in text. Dense, technical, very specialized text. And Russ got to speak a little bit about some of the challenges of what that means. So you take the 40 million papers and you take the 10 million researchers who are publishing today, the 10 million scientists who are publishing their work, and essentially the other 7.4 billion of us on the planet are consciously or unconsciously depending on essentially the equivalent of the state of Michigan population, 10 million people, to solve some of the world's hardest problems, from everything from cancer to climate change. So what if I told you to get home today or get to the airport from this event, you needed to read 50 or 60 of these in order to figure out what the right path would be from here to the airport?
You'll be staying here for a while.
And that's really what we're asking scientists to do every single day. We're basically asking them, and even then, after they read these papers, we're asking, they don't know if they've actually found a great or efficient route. So they deserve a map. They deserve a better way of actually navigating what's going on in science.
So let's talk about some of the challenges with doing that, because parsing language is incredibly difficult. As Rotman was saying, it's one of the grand challenges in AI, and we may see some advances there. But I know from talking to people at MIT, there's also a lot of promise in looking at multimodal ways of learning. So you may be, especially in say biology and medicine, you can learn from a lot of the images there, and if you combine that with language, maybe you can extract more. So what are some of the key kind of machine learning challenges or AI challenges here?
It's a great question. There's a lot of challenges. This is why it's not only an important space, but a really interesting space for a lot of researchers. And again, most of the information is in text. So Russ touched on it in the last session, understanding the context of what's going on. So say you have a scientific paper, and one of the phrases in it is that this protein upregulates this gene. Where in that paper do you understand if that's happening in lab rats, or in humans, or in context of a specific disease? How do you actually tie all that information together into something that's actually practical and very easy for people to understand, not just within that paper, but across all the papers that have been published? And then certainly a smaller part, but a growing part of what we know about science is in images. It's in diagrams of natural models, or it's in diagrams related to the results of a specific paper. And in a much, much smaller fraction, but growing fraction, are data sets that are associated with those papers. But those are unstandardized. Those are very small data sets. They're usually very hard to connect with other things in a meaningful way.
So is there an area of science you think is going to be shaken up or changed most immediately? Or which area do you think?
There's a lot of focus on biomedicine for lots of obvious, very selfish reasons as humans. We want to see what we can do in order to improve the human condition when it comes to health. So there are non-commercial interests, there's commercial interests, there's lots of very motivated researchers, and it's the fastest moving field in a lot of different ways. So, and it's incredibly complex. So we'll see advances there. We're certainly seeing a lot of focus there.
Well, so I have a 1-year-old, George, and I think maybe he'll be a scientist. That would be very cool. We have some scientists here. I'm curious, what's life going to be like for a scientist in 20 years? Or assuming that the AI hasn't completely taken over.
No.
But, yeah.
I believe we'll still be writing papers. I believe we'll still be reading papers. But what we're hoping to do, us and obviously a lot of other people focused on this space, is give scientists a new starting line. So imagine you're an undergraduate student, a biology student walking around campus here, or somebody who might be going into science when they get to school. How do we make it so that they have the ability to be able to drop into a field or change fields, and existing scientists change into a related field, and get up to speed incredibly, much faster? We're going to need to do this across all professions, but we think it's incredibly important for scientists to be able to do that, to basically keep up with the pace.
But do you imagine, I don't know if you're doing research on this, that people would be working with some AI agent that would go and do the research, be like, go and figure out where I should be looking at in this sort of area? Is that the idea?
I think it'll take a lot of different forms. So I think, we're certainly thinking about how can people visualize what's going on in science and scientific natural models. How can those be constructed on the fly every single day as new discoveries are being made? So humans grok models. Any economist would tell you that. And essentially nature and science are a series of interconnected models. And we understand some very well, and we don't understand others very well. But what we're finding is every single day, every single moment, somebody's finding out something slightly new about a model we thought we understood.
And so you mentioned education briefly, and that's obviously why you were acquired by the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation. What is the big opportunity? Well, I mean, there's the big challenge in education that this could help with. How is AI going to sort of come into the classroom?
Into the classroom for teaching. That's certainly not my area of expertise, but at Chan Zuckerberg we are thinking a lot about personalized learning and what it's going to take for teachers and students to change, again, the modality we've been in for 150 years, which is a teacher or professor at the front of the room and students listening and passively taking in information. So that is certainly going to change in a lot of different ways. And the ability to be able to personalize really down to the individual so that each child, each student can basically maximize their opportunity, that's what we're looking to do. Are
you doing any experimentation with classrooms with looking at new ways to personalize learning, to introduce ways for people to for AI to help students? Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, there definitely are a lot of investments in Chan Zuckerberg focused on a couple of hundred schools within the US right now. We're taking advantage of a personalized learning platform, and there's going to be more work being done there for sure.
Well, so one of the big challenges with machine learning is bias, as we're sort of increasingly learning, and I'm curious how that might be relevant to this issue. Like, how do you address the biases that might be sort of hidden in what you're learning from scientific literature? What work are you doing there?
It's a great question. I don't think there would be much debate that who's done science over the last 350 years, largely one gender, largely one race, is really how we want to do science going forward. We need to have scientists who are better representatives of our overall population as a planet.
Have you identified any trends in that?
So what we're finding is if we can get a better understanding of overall what's going on within science, we can essentially hone in on areas where there might be bias in what kind of research is being done. Or more importantly, what kind of research is not being done. So, for example, when you get to the clinical side, maybe there are drugs. It's more easy to discover which drugs have not been tested on women, or just how little research there's been done on the interaction of infectious disease and chronic disease, because that's not a problem in the developed world as much. So I do think putting more of a spotlight on what is being done, what isn't being done in science, using machine learning will help us figure out where there are areas that we can correct. I
imagine there might be concerns about, just focusing on particular areas of science. Like, there's a lot of interest in deep learning. We're going to hear from people who think that isn't the only game in town. And so I'm curious, like, if of all the papers about deep learning, how do you sort of spur, people to look into completely fresh areas? That must be something you're kind of considering as well. You don't want to get people narrowed down, focusing on the old traditional way of doing stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The best thing is that scientists are always looking for what's new, what's undone. But given the pace, given the complexity of scientific information, it's really hard to know where the edge is. Talk to a scientist somebody who's published research or tried to publish research lately. They've probably been scooped, and they've probably been scooped more than once. So there's been another lab down the street in another city, somewhere else on the planet, where very, very similar research has been done. Now, reproducibility is important. We need to perform experiments in multiple places at multiple times. But a lot of time, researchers are trying to figure out what really is at the edge so that they can discover what hasn't been tackled yet.
Do you think there's a risk that something might be lost if you have machines doing a lot of the kind of the fundamental work there?
I think
in terms of, like the inspiration that comes from individual scientists, if you're relying too much on AI, and this is sort of a question that it would be interesting as it creeps into more and more areas.
I think we might get to that stage. I mean, we might get to that stage across all applications of machine learning over time. I think it will be a long time. What we're going to be benefiting from in the short term or in the more immediate term is the ability to scientists be able to do more work and more relevant work faster. So the benefits, giving people an area to even sort of like look at, systems that can propose a hypothesis, and then researchers go out and actually see what actually happens in the real world, and that will take them into further fields of research and maybe adjacent fields. What do they need to read there? What do they need to focus on? How quickly can they learn about that in order to make a new discovery, make a new link?
Right. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the sort of the idea of lifelong learning, because I think there's a lot of concern about, maybe, rightly, and there's uncertainty as well about AI taking jobs and just changing the nature of work really rapidly. And I know this is something we were talking about before that you're thinking about, and the Institute's thinking about. Like, how do you equip people? How can AI help people retrain themselves and keep on top of stuff? And are you looking into that actively?
Yeah, again, on the education side, there's a lot of different, very amazing researchers and organizations who are focused on how to make learners, not how to make students or doctors or how to make lawyers, or how to make somebody who's very good at a specific trade. But how do we actually use personalized learning and new technologies in order to help people learn? Because that is the most important skill set going forward, in my mind.
Right. Well, maybe one final question. Tell us a bit more about the Chan Zuckerberg kind of vision. And Mark and Priscilla's involvement. Why are they so interested in these areas, and how does that manifest itself?
It's a great question. So, Dr. Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg have essentially would like to have a new type of philanthropy. So, a philanthropy that's based on the underlying premise that technology is one of the greatest enablers of change. So having an in-house team and working with a lot of technology organizations, acquiring companies like our company, there's a lot of different ways that they believe within a philanthropy setting we can enable change a lot more quickly in key areas. Currently we're focused on education, science, justice, and opportunity. I focus on the science side, and we are essentially looking to see what tools and technology we can make for those 10 million incredibly important people on the planet, and there's likewise very inspiring work happening across the whole institute.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the results of this. Thank you, Elizabeth.